Hello, people of New World, gamers out there. It's me, Lamani. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're doing well. And today we're going to be talking PvP weapon meta tier list. So without further ado, I've got my coffee ready. Let's do this. First, we have Ice Gauntlet. I think it's definitely a very, very strong weapon that you see a lot in PvP. So it does have Ice Storm, and Ice Storm is one of the best AoE abilities out there. You stack up a bunch of targets, especially if you're full in scaling, you're in light armor, you'll just see crazy damage farming potential from something like Ice Storm. But where it lacks is like Ice Pylon. We look at Wind Chill. Wind Chill sucks. If you use Wind Chill, I applaud you. Good luck. But it's just not great and definitely needs to get dropped or reworked. Where does it really excel? Ice Shower is one of the strongest forms of CC in the game. You can completely block fort walls, doors. You can block OPR doors. You can use it to lock down targets, throw it in a grav wall, and root multiple people. But then the Rend piece. This opens up all kinds of one-shot combos. You slow people. That with Ice Storm slows too. You don't even need to int scale. You just need it for its utility. So then too, you have Entomb. Ice Gauntlet's strong as a support secondary weapon, but I think in terms of overall PvP viability, you will always see an Ice Gauntlet everywhere. It's never a bad option. I'm gonna put it at the A tier. All right, next up, we have the Rapier. It's a healer's favorite secondary. It's pretty much our only secondary weapon other than the Void Gauntlet, but if you wanna really have PvP viability and be able to go into clumps or do anything, you absolutely need a Rapier. I think the Rapier is in an interesting spot because it is strictly only a utility mobility secondary, except when you're playing as like a Dex where you can use Flourish and Finish properly and get execute kills with it. I think a Rapier is fantastic, but I think it lacks in the DPS in other departments where it could be a little stronger, and it's really just used for its mobility. So as such, I think Rapier belongs in B. Some of you might be like, oh, this is S tier, you can move a lot, or even A tier. I think it's all around, it's good, it's nerfed, but it lacks damage. And even right now, the cooldown usage of abilities is pretty clunky. Like we have Evade, but then you still get slowed by it. Sometimes you get stand back. It's just an interesting option. And then with the nerfed riposte, it's tough to use sometimes. Okay, Sword and Shield. This is one that I like to use back in the day with the Blunderbuss, but since they changed like CC, added diminishing returns, it's not really something that works very well, even when you start to think about like the old Sword and Shield Hatchet build from back in the day. But other than that, where do we see Sword and Shield right now? There are very, very few Sword and Shield users out there simply because of the strength of other weapons. Cough, cough, great sword. And simply just the Sword and Shield doesn't fit well. Personally, hot take, I'm putting Sword and Shield at D. I just don't think it is that used or strong compared to the other options and all of the damage options in New World, including things like Dex, Blunderbusses, magic options. It's just not there. It's not on par. Sword and Shield can be interesting in an assassin build. I miss it. I think it's got room to grow, and I think as other things get nerfed, you'll start to see it more. All right, next up, we have the Hatchet. And I have a pretty strong opinion on this one, and I think it is one of the strongest tools in the game. The Hatchet gives you a lot of dive potential and survivability. So it's commonly seen as that secondary utility option strictly because of its Defy Death, but it does have offensive capabilities too. So you look at it, it is very strong. You can use it as a healer. You can use it in the classic, fantastic Greatsword Hatchet build. And you can even use it as a Dex right now and survive with a bow and use that as your back pocket so that you can just have all this effective damage, and it is a fantastic option. So then on top of that, you now have, as let's say you're a melee dive, you have social distancing for a little bit of mobility, rooting potential to catch targets and then catch up to them, and then Berserk to get out of CC, give yourself some healing, you move a little bit faster, and then you have something like Feral Rush where you can catch some from behind and then get them with a slow, and then again, set up kills. And on top of that, no matter what you do, you now have this thing where if you swap to it, you're not going to actually die. You can get out of there, pray you get a heal, get a potion off, and try to run away. So personally, this is going to be a hot take. I'm putting Hatchet in the S tier, okay? Yell at me if you want. I think this is an amazing option that enables crazy builds and crazy damage potential from the other S tier weapons that I'll mention later, that this strictly because of Defy Death and the way that it works, makes this incredible. The viability is just all across the board and it's very strong. Okay, next up we have the Void Gauntlet. And because this gauntlet is pretty much always paired with the Ice Gauntlet as a frontline like bruiser support mage for CC, I think it's gonna go in the A tier. And now I will maybe potentially get myself to talk it up to S tier. Here are the things with the Void Gauntlet. I think it's great because one, It is able to get so many cooldowns out. It's the main part of an IGVG setup. You have Scream to anti-heal. You have Orb to rend and throw dots everywhere and to apply damage pressure. You have Oblivion to remove buffs, give stam back, and empower and weaken people. You know, I'm kind of thinking this is S tier. And now I will maybe potentially get myself to talk it up to S tier. And then you can also use it as a AoE healing option to just put crazy amounts of output out there, as well as supply all kinds of other utility. So I think with the Void Gauntlet, you know, I'm gonna do this actually. I think this is A tier. I think this doesn't have as much super utility as I'm making it sound like, but it is great for enabling things. And so I think the Void Gauntlet is S tier because of its multifaceted capacity to improve gameplay and the fact that it is crucial in an IGVG build. They're just a match made in heaven. If you think about it in terms of utility, but then healing potential and then offensive potential and just set up for your team, that the Void Gauntlet is a pretty S tier. What? You know what? One more time. I'm doing a hot take here. I think this is A. I think it's A. I think these are on par. S is kind of what I see as like pretty nuts broken, but I like this setup. Void Gauntlet, I put it at A. Come at me in the comments. Okay, next one, Blunderbuss. Now, this is another one that gets interesting. If you are a high-skilled player and you know how to do the very easy combos that are in the game and actually hit shots, Blunderbuss, I think, can make the argument for S or A tier. It's not in that B, C, or D. It is a very strong weapon. Now, the thing with Blunderbuss is you can play this in a medium or a light setup, especially if you're in a light setup playing like, you know, the 100 or 150 con. Like you could go 100 con and just run around with Mortal Empowerment and OPR. But even in war, when you start to pair like IGBB, this is a very strong combination. So you look at the Blunderbuss and then you start to think about, okay, I could also pair it with a Warhammer. So you could go light, you can go medium. You can play that medium setup in clumps. You can do it the same thing with an IG and you have CC, and then you have a weapon that you can even like one-shot burst people with in medium armor while you're playing in medium armor, or if you're in light, you can one-shot burst people almost who are in medium armor against you, like an enemy. I personally think that the Blunderbuss, if played correctly, is an S tier weapon in PvP. I think if you start to look at some of these one-shot builds that are out there, or somebody who plays it very well, baits CC, and just understands how to use the weapon properly, that it is very, 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 very strong. Next up's the bow. I'm just not even gonna say anything. It's S tier. Right now we're in a Dex meta. Bow is nuts. You start stacking Mortal Empowerment. All Dex is crazy other than like Dex melee weapons. And it is just a force to be reckoned with. Somebody who's at 15 stacks with a bow or a musket, we'll talk about that later, is just never going to be stopped, especially you throw a pocket healer on top of them, and they're going to go to town, rack up tons of kills, and just be absolutely annoying. Now, the benefit with a bow over something like a musket is you can play down low with a bow. You can move around. You have a lot more mobility. You don't have to be playing far away. If you get caught in melee while you have a musket out, good luck. If you've got your bow ready, you have other ways to stagger them. You have other ways to get a quick shot off. It's a lot easier to play closer up with a bow when somebody's up in your face. You can also play at range very easily and contest muskets while you're using the bow. I think the bow is just so strong right now with its hitboxes, its ability to do crazy damage and combo and 3-2-1 people, and its synergy when using, you know, even a weapon like a rapier, or you can swap it out for a musket. Okay, next up we have the Great Axe, and nobody can deny playing Great Axe, Warhammer, Bruiser setups. You can play it in medium, you can play it in light. Great Axe is incredibly strong. It's got CC, it has defensiveness, it has self-healing, it has damage output. You can deflect projectiles. You can, if you choose to use like a Reap setup, you can pull them from Narnia. It's got gravity well for all the setups in the world and combos. But I think Great Axe compared to the past of like, okay, triple Gravwell explosion, or, you know, just the way that the Great Axe lunge used to be and its hit detection, I'm going to put Great Axe at A. I think you always need it. It's easy to use, but there's still that level of easy to learn, harder to master, to understand, okay, how can I really take advantage of this in melee combat? Sure, sometimes you can close your eyes, hit Maelstrom, and then throw Gravity Well down, and then smile and eat your glue. But I think there's also that nuance of, okay, here's when I feint, here's how I use my cooldowns, and here's how I reposition and truly properly play it and know how to play my life. So right now in the meta, it's where it needs to be, and it's in an A. This is a weapon I'm going to say a very few amount of words on. It's the Greatsword. It's definitely great, and it is completely and utterly busted. Now, I know there's a lot of you out there that are great sword enjoyers. If there was an S tier plus plus plus, it would be plus 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 plus. Okay, it's an incredibly strong weapon right now. It's going in S tier. It has the damage output of a freight train, but then also has the like OG Great Axe sort of lunging, except even worse. And so now I have these heavy attacks that come out incredibly fast and will do insane amounts of damage when people are running away, especially, but they will lunge from, a state over. It is just absurd. And then on top of that, okay, now they've done that, they're going to get into their onslaught stance, and then they're going to spin onto you and root you, and then you're just probably dead. So good luck, especially if there's more than one of these. And then this is the sole reason I've put the Hatchet in the S tier, is because the only way you can really truly play this the way it needs to be played is if you put a Hatchet on the back so that you can play like a freak and then not die and then dive out and just get ready to do it over and over and over and over and over again. It is a fun weapon to use when you're using it, and it is an utter nightmare when it is something that's against you, especially when everybody and their mother is chasing you with it while you're getting shot at by the very strong Dex players. It's S tier, it's above S tier, it's above the rest, and right now this is the king of the damage meta in my opinion, that and Dex. Musket is, again, I think it's an S tier option. You can go in OPR and sit on top of a rock and just sit there sniping people all day and making them really, really upset. You can play it in a war. And again, stacking Mortal Empowerment. You get 15 Mortal Empowerment stacks, you are going to have a fun time in your war. You need to position well with the musket, which makes it a little bit different than the bow. But with the musket, it's just hit scan. You just hit them in the body with a couple shots. You don't have to hit headshots, quite honestly, and you're going to just fry people. You can play basically out in max render distance where nobody can see you and you're just sitting there sniping. It's like you're playing Call of Duty: A New World. You can play with a Rapier, run away, and you have so much ability to reposition and just completely annihilate single targets like healers and light armor players. With all that being said, S tier option. I was thinking about this while I was doing this. I think I'm going to move the Blunderbuss down to the A tier. Okay, this is kind of like a mid-game pivot. I think it's very, very strong if you can hit every shot and be consistent with it. Otherwise, if you're not, which most people won't be able to because it is a little clunky with its hit detection, it's weird when you reload it, you sometimes slow down, you don't want to reload, you want to instant reload it by weapon swapping. But I think it belongs in the A tier when I'm starting to think of like greatsword, bow, musket. It's not on that level, but it is very strong in the hands of a player who knows how to use it. Next up, we have Fire Staff. Here's what I'm going to say about Fire Staff. Yes, it is fun to use. It's great in an OPR. It's great if you're playing like solo. But when it comes to actual war viability and doing damage, you can bring a Fire Staff. But it's like, if you bring a Fire Staff, why don't you just bring a bow instead? They play around the same distance. They play a very similar sort of play style. And if anything, the bow is far more mobile because of its dex scaling and giving you cheaper rolls. It has higher damage. It's just better for picking targets. It's got staggers. If you're going to run a Fire Staff, it's more of like a stat patter sort of weapon. And so for that, I'm going to put it C tier because I don't really think it's on Sword and Shield level of like just, it's not really that useful. It definitely can be, but it's the idea of why would you not just take the better options that are honestly easier to play instead of this one? Okay, now if you can't see this because I have it all black, this is a life staff. It's the glowing crystal one. There you go. You can kind of see it there. So it's right there. I heal for all of my stuff. I'm a healer, and some of you might think that this is a little biased, and it's my opinion, so again, you can listen. I think right now, if you look at the way that the current damage meta is, I think healing is very, very balanced in the sense of cast time. I never think that a heal should have been instant cast like old Light's Embrace, but I think that the life staff is in a little bit of a tough spot because when it comes to something like bows and it comes to muskets, right? I'm getting slowed by powder burns. I'm getting staggered by bow shots. They're doing crazy amounts of damage. And then it's like, oh, wait, now there's a greatsword glue eater on top of me with his hatchet, and I have to try and run away while I'm also getting shot by Dex. Now you can argue like, oh, that's a positional thing. But then it's like, okay, when there's 100 million of them, what am I supposed to do? On top of that, we also have things like detonate. We have things like, just general CC options. But the amount of burst damage in the game right now, it's just a burst heavy meta, and it is almost impossible to heal at times. If you have a team that knows what they're doing and they coordinate detonates, they're calling targets out, yes, you should be able to burst targets down. But with the life staff right now, we have no ways to stop a detonate. There's times I pre-cast. I'm getting cast ready because I know I have the detonates coming, and I cast and I cast and I cast with my DE resets, and it's just not enough to try and keep somebody alive. Now you can argue that, maybe you weren't supposed to keep them alive in the first place. And that's a valid argument. But I think the thing is that there are so many weapons and so many sources of damage that allow you to do that, that I'm going to put the life staff, personally, at a B tier. I think you can argue it's an A. I'm going to put it right there where my mouse is because it's hard to see right now. But I'm going to put it at a B tier. I think the life staff is kind of pigeonholed into a few specific builds. You're either full AoE healer and then you're just sitting there padding meters, or you're running like a mending DE sacred build, or you do something like what I do and I run full single targeted healing, which is the only way I can survive against some of this stuff. But you look at that and you think about, okay, Splash of Light is horrendous. Sit there and you clap, you're just prone to getting 3-2-1 and killed. It is a long cooldown, barely heals anything. Yes, it does not need any sort of line of sight, and it has incredible range. But the thing is, you can only use it in a group ever. And then even then, it's still generally not enough to try and keep people alive. Then you look at something like LE and DE. There is a little bit of a preference. It's nice to use LE because it's constantly up and you can get a lot more quick casts and trying to top people off. But then you look at DE and it's like DE has the full reset potential. So it's definitely the better option. And then it can bounce, give you some AoE viability. Sacred Ground is always very strong. Beacon can be very strong for AoE output. Orb is great for the Fortify. But then you do this on top of, there are so many times where I have people in a Sacred Ground with that Fortify, with Orb Fortify, they're getting healed, and then they still just get killed by Dex. And I'm sitting there, even times where I'm just cycling single target heals. It's one Dex can kill somebody if they've got enough stacks, and I think that's just something to say like Mortal Empowerment needs an adjustment, and I think everything's going to be fine. I'm going to put it in the B tier for now. I would love to hear what other people think in the comments below. There's just a lot of burst damage, and it's hard. It's really hard, so I'm going with B tier. Argue with me if you want. Next up, we have the Spear. Here's what I'm going to say about the Spear. There's some viability. It's a PvE weapon. This would be S tier in PvE. But I want to know how many of you have seen a Spear in your last 20 wars or in your OPRs. There are some people who use the bow and the spear, but then you kind of know that those players are the ones you should probably just go dive after because it's going to be an easy kill pickup. Or there's some pretty crazy Rapier spear builds you can use. Even 3v3, it's pretty strong. But I think the spear in terms of PvP overall viability is sitting at that D, right? You've got a lot of CC potential. It doesn't have like the escapes that some of the other weapons have or the defensiveness. Even like if you look at its offensive output, it's like, okay, if I'm playing at spear range, why wouldn't I just use a great sword? Like anything a spear can do, I don't even need to stun people. I can just sit there with a great sword. I can root them, kill them, do way more with it. That's my opinion on spear. It's short, sweet, but it's PvE fantastic. PvP definitely needs some adjustments to really get used properly. And now the last one we have is the hammer, and you'll see I put it in A tier. I kind of did this thing where I have IGVG in A tier, I have Great Axe and Hammer in A tier, and then the Blunderbuss 2 that pairs with the hammer also in A tier. It has CC, it's strong when it's used correctly. It's easy to learn, a little harder to master in terms of like how to use your cooldowns or how to properly, finesse it and really get use out of it. It is a utility secondary. You're never going to sit there and swing with your hammer, but then there's those nuances of when can you fit in a little light attack before you do something, or how do you properly use Wrecking Ball, or when should you use Path or Shockwave, and just effective cooldown management. I think this hammer has always been a pretty balanced weapon. I don't ever think there's been an issue with it. I think shockwaves are fair. You know when you can dodge them. You know when you're about to be in an oh crap moment, you're going to get locked down by one and killed. It's telegraphed. It's there. Even Wrecking Ball. Wrecking Ball at times can be like, how did that just hit me? And then you remember it has a ground AoE component that you don't always see. And then even Path of Destiny is so strong too, just for interrupting heals. There's so many times I'm trying to heal somebody and I get hit by a path and then they end up dying. So I don't think it's like crazy overpowered. I don't think it's underpowered. I think it's right where it needs to be in the A tier. That's my opinion on sort of like the bruiser setup and hammers right now. All right, so let's wrap it up. What are my tiers? In the D tier for PvP, we have Sword and Shield and Spear. C tier, we have Fire Staff because you could just take a bow and fill the same kind of role. B tier, I put the Life Staff because I'm biased, and then I put the Rapier. A tier, we have Ice Gauntlet, Void Gauntlet. We have Great Axe and Warhammer, and the Blunderbuss, which I moved down from S tier. In S tier, I have the Hatchet simply because it makes all of these other weapons, even a musket if you choose to use it, but especially right now with the bow and people choosing to use it with bow and greatsword, it allows them to do the crazy things that they're able to do. Bow is just incredibly strong. It can be played at all kinds of distances and still just have crazy output thanks to Mortal Empowerment. Greatsword is just, it's the greatsword. It's completely busted. And the Hatchet lets you play like a freak. And then the musket is hit scan, play far away, and because of Mortal Empowerment and Dex, and if you're rolling, you will be killing tons of people. That's my opinion. Argue with me if you want. Let me know how you feel about it down in the comments. As always, I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know what other tier lists you'd be interested to hear me sit and rant about for a while. But thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you to every single one of you beautiful people for being you. Peace.